I'm Eloise Patterson, a 35-year-old sales director, and today was supposed to be the day. $1.2 million sealed. The culmination of a decade of grinding. The table was set for 5. My family was finally supposed to recognize my professional Everest. But look around for perfectly empty chairs. I watched the waiter approach, his eyes full of practiced pity. That pity was worse than the absence. The success was all mine, but the emptiness belonged to them. Empty chairs spoke. I checked my phone again. No missed calls. 0 texts from my parents. Not even a generic thumbs up from my brother Theodore. It wasn't a mistake, it was a deliberate, loud silence. My hand trembled as I lifted my glass. I forced a toast to the empty seats, my voice barely a whisper, "Happy birthday, Eloise." I hid the shock behind a smile so tight it hurt. I was the family ATM, but I was never family priority. To understand the empty chairs, you have to understand the family ecosystem. I was the reliable one, the pragmatic one. My older brother, Theodore, was the golden child, the artistic soul whose failures were always romanticized. His drama, his constant need for a bailout, that was currency. My success? That was simply the expected collateral. My parents poured their social and financial energy into Theodore, excusing every poor choice with a sigh and an open checkbook. Theodore was the focus. I built my career in tech sales from absolute scratch, grit, late nights, pure persistence. They never truly cared about the job, they only cared about the commission checks. My success was just leverage for Theodore's next big break or another tuition payment for his perpetually unfinished degree. I was the foundation they leaned on, the ATM they visited, but never the daughter they celebrated. The system was rigged from the start. From the time I was a kid, I learned that competence meant invisibility. I was the child who quietly solved problems, the one who managed the family schedule, fixed the broken printer, or balanced the checkbook when Theodore forgot. I was competent, therefore I required no attention. At family gatherings, my achievements, a high score on a test, a scholarship, were minimized with a dismissive wave. They didn't applaud my wins, they simply banked on them. Invisibility was the norm. My successes were never for my glory, they were assets to prop up the family narrative, and, more critically, Theodore's failures. Every promotion, every bonus was mentally earmarked for his next business idea or personal crisis. It was never, "Congratulations, Eloise." It was always, "Good, now we can finally afford to send Theodore on that retreat." My success became their entitlement, and my achievements were minimized because if they were too big, the debt they owed me would be too visible. Success was a liability. That birthday table wasn't just empty, it was the physical manifestation of that lifelong pattern. They weren't ignoring my success, they were asserting their control by prioritizing their neglect. But what happens when the invisible daughter decides to stop being the family safety net? What happens next? I found my escape in tech sales. It wasn't creative, but it was measurable. My success depended on grit, persistence, and data, not on inherited favor. I poured myself into deals, traveled across time zones, and embraced the long hours. The exhaustion was honest, unlike the emotional fatigue of family life. I wasn't seeking applause, I was seeking autonomy. This job was my fortress, built by my own hands, brick by digital brick. My fortress was built. The rush of closing a tough account became my real validation. It was proof that my worth existed outside their suffocating opinion. I was making real money, making a real impact. For the first time, I felt the early, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I could redefine my value. The next phase was simple: scale up and solidify. Every family gathering was a masterclass in the double standard. My parents would praise Theodore publicly for having passion, even if his passion resulted in financial ruin. When it came to me, their remarks were designed to undermine. Sales is practical, Eloise, but it's not art. Or, you work too much, a real woman focuses on family. They couldn't diminish my income, so they diminished the value of my success and implied that my dedication meant I was fundamentally flawed. Success was never enough. Their message was clear: my work was a means to an end, specifically their end. Theodore was family priority, I was the family resource. Once, my mother actually said, "Theodore needs our focus now. Your job can handle itself, Eloise." Her words cut deeper than any insult. They implied that my life, my efforts, and my achievements were less important than his stagnation. It was the ultimate dismissal of my identity and my dedication. Is your value just a resource? I fell into the trap. I subconsciously believed that if I worked harder, achieved more, and contributed more money, they would eventually run out of reasons not to celebrate me. So, I worked twice as hard. I closed tough, unglamorous accounts that built my division's revenue, sacrificing my early 30s, relationships, sleep, hobbies, to the altar of professional success. It was a desperate, unconscious exchange, my time and wealth for their basic human acceptance. Acceptance was the goal. The more I earned, the more they expected, particularly for Theodore's ventures. I signed the checks, masking my resentment with a brittle sense of obligation. The financial cost was obvious, but the personal cost was devastating. I missed funerals, weddings, and my own chance at starting a family, all because I was chasing a transactional relationship that was never meant to be reciprocal. I thought money could buy validation, but it only bought me more distance. Was this endless grind worth the silence? I closed my biggest deal yet, a multi-year contract that won me the Division Excellence Award. I invited them all. The night of the ceremony, the 4 reserved seats remained empty. My mother later called, not to apologize, but to ask if I could wire the money for Theodore's urgent business class flight to Bali. Their absence was louder than the applause, and it was a direct statement: your accomplishments are not worthy of our time, only your resources are. Absence was a statement. The pattern was sickeningly reliable. My graduation? Missed, because Theodore had a migraine. My major promotion to director? They couldn't make it, because they were helping Theodore sort out his tax issues. They always prioritized Theodore's chaos over my quiet milestones. I kept trying, thinking one achievement, one giant check, would finally shift the dynamic. But the goalposts kept moving. The more I gave, the less I mattered as a person. Chaos over milestones, sitting alone at that birthday table was the final realization: I was never going to buy their love. My life was a revolving door of performance designed to win a prize that didn't exist. It was time to stop performing for the empty seats. But how do you rewrite a script that has defined you since childhood? I was drowning my bitterness in a glass of Cabernet when he interrupted my internal monologue. Alexander. He was a business consultant dining alone nearby, refined, with observant eyes. "Forgive my intrusion," he said, but I overheard the waiter. $1.2 million deal on your birthday is worth more than a party for one. My defenses went up instantly. I expected pity, or worse, a sales pitch. But he wasn't selling anything. He was offering genuine human interest, a commodity I hadn't received from my family in decades. He wasn't selling. I found myself explaining the empty chairs, the Theodore situation, the endless cycle of earning for approval. I waited for the inevitable, the platitudes or the blame. Instead, Alexander simply listened. When I finished, he didn't call my parents narcissists or offer cheap fixes. He just said, "Eloise, it sounds like you're mistaking their neglect for your failure. Your success is real, but your validation is coming from the wrong source." His empathy wasn't gentle, it was surgical, cutting right to the root of the problem. He cut to the root. That conversation was the turning point. Alexander showed me that I already had the self-worth. I was just trying to get them to co-sign it. I realized external respect, The kind I earned professionally and the kind Alexander offered could replace the missing family validation. It sparked a revolutionary idea. What if I stopped seeking approval and started focusing solely on building my own empire of respect and autonomy? Alexander and I started meeting regularly. Not just for dates, but to talk strategy, ambition, and the psychology of sales. He saw the architect in me, not the victim. He respected my work ethic and saw my achievements as milestones, not obligations. This was foreign territory. My family had offered transactional love. Alexander offered reciprocal respect. He didn't try to fix my past, he validated my present. He showed me that true validation is earned, not begged for. True validation is earned. I started chasing success for the joy of it, not the necessity of paying Theodore's rent. The external respect Alexander gave me began to fill the void left by my parents' constant dismissal. I realized validation isn't a family right, it's a human necessity that you can, and should, find outside of toxicity. My dreams changed. They weren't about getting a better title, they were about achieving financial autonomy so complete that my family's financial needs, and their emotional manipulation, would be irrelevant. That's when the real vision for my empire began. Empire was the focus. With Alexander's support, my trajectory shifted from seeking rescue to seeking mastery. I was no longer the invisible helper, I was the future CEO. This new direction felt like the truest form of defiance. But the old patterns die hard. The financial ties were still strong, and the next big family crisis was inevitable. Would this newfound confidence be enough to withstand the financial and emotional blackmail that was surely coming next? I shifted my energy entirely. No more calls asking if Theodore was okay. My focus was laser-sharp, the VP promotion. Alexander helped me strategize, not just on the sales pitch, but on the political pitch. I invested in my skill set, my network, and my future, channeling every ounce of past frustration into fuel. The old Eloise worked for applause, the new Eloise worked for power. This promotion wasn't a request for validation, it was a declaration of independence. Power was the currency. I started practicing emotional detachment. My mother sent a cryptic text about Theodore needing legal counsel for a traffic fine. The old me would have panicked, called the lawyer, and wired the funds. The new me archived the message. I was done allowing their minor chaos to derail my major milestones. My energy was a finite resource, and I decided their drama no longer qualified for my attention. I was building boundaries where only concrete results, my results, mattered. Archive the drama. Alexander had warned me, when they smell success, they smell opportunity. I took action. I restructured my assets, creating legal and financial walls they couldn't penetrate. No more shared bank accounts. No more easy access. I formalized my finances so that any future transaction had to be an intentional gift, not an expected withdrawal. This wasn't just about money, it was about protecting my future and removing the financial leverage they held over my emotions. Financial walls went up. I knew the promotion would be a beacon to them. It would signal not my victory, but their next potential payday. I operated under silent vigilance, anticipating the phone call that would turn my professional high into emotional chaos. I felt a deep, constant tension, the quiet before the storm. But this time, I wasn't scared of the storm, I was prepared to weather it. I had the emotional and financial tools to stop being the family anchor, and start being the captain of my own ship. Ready for the storm. The day of the announcement arrived. My promotion was secured, my financial defenses were airtight. I waited. I didn't have to wait long. The moment my success was announced publicly, the phone rang, displaying my mother's number. The signal had been received. The family revenge was about to start. But the question remained, had I truly become immune to their emotional manipulation, or would the old guilt trip still find a way to dismantle my peace? The phone screen glowed. Mom. Just seeing her name brought back the rush of anxiety and the ghosts of past rejections. I remembered the cold sting of humiliation after my college graduation, when they promised a celebratory dinner, only to cancel last minute because Theodore needed moral support at a low point. They never missed a chance to elevate his need over my accomplishment. Panic surged, threatening to pull me back into the vortex of self-doubt. My immediate thought, what do they want this time? Ghosts were ringing. I remembered the time I offered to buy them a new car, and my father scoffed, Theodore actually needs a loan to start a real business, LOEs, not frivolous consumerism. My generosity was recast as shallow. My money was only valuable when it served Theodore's higher purpose. I was never the daughter who gave, I was the resource that withheld. This pattern wasn't about love, it was pure power dynamics, designed to keep me emotionally dependent and financially compliant. That memory was the cold shower I needed. Money was only leverage, I steadied myself. I wasn't that young, desperate girl anymore. The woman who closed the $1.2 million deal, the future VP, knew the difference between love and coercion. They only show up when they need you, Alexander's voice echoed in my head. I focused on the truth. They had only confirmed my worth by showing how desperately they relied on my success. My power was not in giving them money, it was in setting the boundary and refusing to engage with the guilt. I needed to answer, but not on their terms. Power was the boundary. The humiliation of the past was being weaponized against me in the present, but I wouldn't let it land. I hit the accept button, my voice firm and professional. No panic, no desperation. They were about to ask me for the money, I was about to ask them to respect my peace. The rules of the game had officially changed. But what happens when you finally say no to the people who believe they own your success? The signal was clear, and the request was predictable. Theodore's urgent business venture had collapsed, leaving him with mounting debt and a very public lien on their family home. My mother's voice was instantly frantic, laced with the familiar guilt-tripping language of family first and where is your loyalty? She didn't congratulate me on the VP role, she framed it as a divine provision for Theodore. She needed $150,000 wired by end of day. The number was astronomical, but the request was painfully small and manipulative. Theodore's new lien. I let her finish. Then, I didn't justify, apologize, or explain my finances. I simply replied, no, Mother. I will not be wiring any money. The silence on the line was magnificent, the sound of an established power structure collapsing. She sputtered, accusing me of coldness, cruelty, and abandoning my blood. Your success is supposed to help us, she screamed. I stood firm, my success is for me. My financial decisions are no longer dictated by Theodore's failures. The silence was magnificent. She immediately resorted to the nuclear option, the guilt trip. Your father is sick with worry. You will be responsible for sending us into bankruptcy. This used to work. It used to send me scrambling for my checkbook. But Alexander had prepped me for this specific line. I replied calmly, Mother, your finances are the result of poor choices. Not my lack of loyalty. I refused to be held emotionally hostage to Theodore's recklessness any longer. I took back the power of my own narrative. No more emotional hostage. My mother's voice rose to a hysterical shriek. You will regret this. You will be alone. I didn't argue. I delivered the final, sharp blow. You've ensured my independence, Mother. I'm choosing my peace. I pressed the end call button. The silence that followed in my high-rise office wasn't empty, it was filled with the massive, roaring sound of my own self-respect. It felt like severing an umbilical cord that had been toxic for 3 decades. I was finally free of the expectation. Peace over obligation. I looked out over the city. The emptiness was gone. In its place was an exhilarating sense of control. I had rejected their financial demands, but the true revenge wasn't just saying no. It was ensuring they witnessed my success flourish without them. Theodore and my parents hadn't seen the last of me. How did Eloise turn the ultimate rejection into the ultimate, quiet revenge that devastated her family's reputation and wealth? I knew their 50th anniversary party, paid for by my credit card, naturally, was the perfect stage. Theodore and my parents greeted me with forced smiles, acting as if the $150,000 crisis had evaporated. They were performative, hoping to reel me back into the emotional fold before the lean hit. I stood next to Alexander, my anchor and my silent co-conspirator. The atmosphere was thick with their fake bonhomie and my quiet, devastating intention. They saw a victim returning. I saw a door slamming shut. Stage was perfectly set. My father gave his toast. He didn't thank me directly, but he made sure to mention our daughter Eloise, whose professional success always ensures the family's stability. A subtle public pressure to open my wallet. Theodore smirked, he knew the game. It was the moment they always tried to reclaim control, by publicly binding my worth to their needs. But tonight, their words tasted like ash, because I had the trump card. I smiled politely, a real, genuine smile of knowing, you have no idea what's coming. Trump card was ready. I took the microphone. The room went silent. I thanked them for the lessons in self-reliance they had given me. Then, the silence truly deepened when I introduced Alexander, not as my boyfriend, but as my corporate counsel. I looked directly at my parents. In light of Father's recent public statement about family stability, I have a clarification to make regarding my VP promotion and my family assets. I nodded to Alexander. The shift in their expressions, from smugness to panic, was instantaneous. From smugness to panic. Alexander took the floor. His voice was calm, professional, and devastatingly precise. Mrs. and Mr. Darden, as your daughter's corporate counsel, I must confirm that her assets and the majority stake in her new tech venture are legally secured solely in her name. Furthermore, the $150,000 required to settle the lien on your home must be secured through conventional means, as Ms. Darden has officially executed documents removing all current family members from any potential financial claims or future inheritance. Inheritance revoked. The room erupted. Theodore lunged, fueled by pure rage, but Alexander, always prepared, gently blocked him. My mother gasped, realizing the true cost of their neglect, not just money, but their very future. I raised my glass to them, completing the toast I started alone months ago. Happy anniversary, Mother and Father. May your future be as bright as your choices. It was done. The quiet revenge was loud. But what was the true, final financial cost of this ultimate familial reckoning? We walked away from the wreckage. The silence of the city street was a balm compared to the screaming chaos inside the ballroom. Theodore's sputtered threats faded behind us. Alexander didn't offer a dramatic congratulations, he simply held my hand, a gesture of quiet support. That was the real victory. It wasn't the public humiliation, it was leaving, finally being able to choose silence over obligation. For the first time in my life, a family moment wasn't followed by a request for money or a wave of guilt. Silence was the balm. I realized the difference between the two forms of valuation. My parents saw me as a transactional ATM, high value, zero self-worth. Alexander and my colleagues saw my inherent worth, high competence, high respect. The former was exhausting and depleting, the latter was energizing and reciprocal. The money I earned for myself suddenly felt different, clean, not tainted by their constant grasping. I wasn't waiting for a crumb of their approval anymore. I was baking my own feast. Feast, not crumbs. The true victory wasn't the announcement of the inheritance revocation. The true victory was the fact that their screaming panic no longer held any power over my physiology. I slept soundly that night, something I hadn't done after a family encounter in years. I woke up the next morning and went to work, and for the first time, I felt the success entirely belonged to me. The ultimate revenge was the peace I found when I finally realized that their love was never the goal, my freedom was. Freedom was the prize. I saw the small article days later. Theodore's investment failure had reached the local news, complete with a photo of the lien on the family home. No big drama, just the quiet, inexorable logic of consequence. It wasn't a celebratory moment of malice, it was a detached acknowledgement of justice. For years, my success had been his safety net. Now, the net was gone. The greatest punishment wasn't anything I did to them, but everything I stopped doing for them. Justice was detached. My family may have lost their safety net and their inheritance, but I gained a life built on solid, self-defined ground. The revenge wasn't the goal, the boundary was the goal, and the revenge was the consequence. It was the final, elegant solution to years of pain. But what happened to Theodore and my parents when they realized their cash cow was gone forever, and who ultimately paid the price for their negligence? Life post-revelation was exquisitely gilded. I bought the penthouse, the luxury car, and finally, the vintage watch I'd always wanted. Material success felt like a protective shield, a barrier between my new self and the old toxicity. Yet, sometimes in the massive, silent living room, a subtle emptiness would creep in. It wasn't sadness, but a low hum, the sound of severing a bond, no matter how toxic. It was the cost of choosing myself. You can't cut off toxicity without cutting off the source entirely. A low, heavy hum. My mother tried to contact me a few times, short, cryptic calls usually trying to lure me back with appeals to nostalgia or fake sickness. I didn't block them. But I simply didn't engage. I realized true independence wasn't about shouting defiance, it was about the quiet, consistent choice not to react. The emotional buttons they had installed in me since birth were finally rusting away. I was finally healing from the lifelong addiction to their approval. It was a victory measured in silent phones and peaceful evenings. Buttons were rusting away. I heard through the grapevine that Theodore was doing odd jobs, his startup dreams finally reduced to predictable manual labor. It wasn't a satisfying laugh, it was an observation. I felt a deep, detached pity for the shell of the golden boy. He had never been forced to develop resilience. Thanks to my lifelong financial cushioning. His failure was simply the natural consequence of his dependency, and I was no longer responsible for softening his landing. The system they created had finally devoured its preferred child. Theodore's natural consequence. My new family consisted of Alexander and the friends who genuinely celebrated my victories, big and small. They valued the person, not the resource. We raised a glass not to a promotion, but to peace. That moment felt more like a real family than any manufactured holiday dinner I'd ever endured. I finally understood that family isn't blood, it's the reciprocity of respect. The emptiness remained a memory, a scar that proved I survived. I had traded a toxic birthright for a priceless, self-made life. Respect is the bond. I was a VP, a founder, and a financially independent woman. I had everything I had ever earned, and nothing I didn't deserve. The revenge story wasn't about their downfall, it was about my ultimate ascent. The success was real, the emptiness was temporary and a necessary phase of healing. The biggest question isn't how I got revenge, but what happens when the victim becomes the powerful architect of her own life and never looks back. Months after the anniversary, the dust settled. My revenge was complete, financially and socially. Yet, the expected feeling of exultation was missing. One afternoon, packing up old things, I found a faded family photo, Theodore smiling, my parents oblivious. It didn't trigger anger, it triggered a strange, hollow echo. I realized I had planned the perfect financial destruction, but the emptiness I felt after the confrontation was the same emptiness I felt before it. Vengeance wasn't the antidote to their neglect or my deep-seated pain, a fact that was profoundly sobering. The antidote was missing. I had spent my life seeking to wound them back, to make them feel the pain of my dismissal. The cruel truth? They were incapable of feeling it. Their world revolved only around the absence of money, not the presence of my genuine pain. My entire elaborate plan had hit an unfeeling target. The suffering I caused them was purely financial, a consequence they probably blamed on me, not their own actions. The emotional reckoning I craved never happened, because emotional depth wasn't in their toolkit, even for their own children. Target was unfeeling. Alexander noticed the shift. He simply said, "You fought their war, Eloise. You won. But their war was never yours to begin with. They don't get to define your peace, and they don't get to define your completion. The emptiness you feel is the realization that their existence was never the key to your happiness. Only a decades-long distraction." His words were a gentle, final surgery, removing the last piece of toxic hope. My life didn't need their destruction to be whole, it needed my acceptance of their limits. Acceptance was the key. The cycle of seeking their love, earning their rejection, and finally seeking revenge had officially ended. It didn't end with a bang, it ended with an almost bored sigh. I realized the revenge wasn't the climax of my story, the climax was the quiet moment when I decided their opinion was utterly irrelevant. The void wasn't the loss of them, the void was the loss of the idea of who they should have been. My true work was to fill that space with my own self-made purpose and meaningful relationships. Idea was the true loss. I carried the lessons forward. I used my experience not to fuel further bitterness, but to mentor others struggling with emotional boundaries. My advice was simple: don't fight their war. Build your own empire. I knew my story was now defined not by the family I left behind, but by the life I purposefully created. The revenge became a footnote in the epic of my independence. It was the necessary surgical removal, but the healing and the growth were the real plot of my journey. Healing was the real plot. I never heard from my parents again after the lien was enforced. They found a new victim, no doubt. The wound closed. I learned that you don't need a villain to be a hero, you just need to choose yourself. My wealth was now used to create stability and love, not to buy temporary silence. The cruelest truth was the most liberating. I was free because they didn't care enough to hurt me anymore. And I didn't care enough to seek their pain. Choose yourself, be the hero. So, what's the ultimate takeaway from this family revenge story? The revenge was necessary to sever the ties, but the independence was the ultimate prize. You can't force narcissists to feel remorse, but you can force them to live with the consequences of their financial short-sightedness. I got my justice. I got my peace. But what if the family had tried to sue me to reclaim the inheritance? How solid were my financial walls, really, when put to the ultimate legal test? They didn't vanish entirely. 3 months after the inheritance bomb, the recovery attempts began. Not with an apology, of course, but a calculated olive branch. The first was an email from my mother, titled, "We miss you." It was classic hoovering, pulling the victim back into the cycle by feigning emotional distress. The body mentioned a small legal issue requiring a brief consultation with Alexander, not me. They were testing the financial walls, seeing if the legal boundary was just for show. My response? Archive and delete. No engagement, no fuel. Hoovering began immediately. Next came the sentimental pressure. A small box of my childhood trinkets arrived, along with a handwritten note from my father. He recalled a shared memory, twisting it into a narrative of my current cruelty. It was designed to trigger the old guilt: you are destroying a beautiful past. I looked at the trinkets, not with fondness, but with objective clarity. They were bait. I took photos of the box for legal documentation and sent it back, unopened, via certified mail. I refused to let them weaponize nostalgia against my future. Nostalgia was weaponized. Alexander confirmed my instinct. Any contact was merely a fishing expedition for money or weakness. My defense was flawless because it was consistent, zero response. I realized the revenge was the key that locked the door, but the refusal to engage was the peace I lived in. I wasn't waiting for their downfall anymore, I was building my own ascent. The closure wasn't an event, it was a daily decision. But what if their attempts escalated, and they tried to use public slander or legal action to destroy the success I fought so hard to build? What if they sue for slander? I knew the quiet game wouldn't last. My family wasn't capable of graceful defeat. The escalation came not through direct pleading, but through digital warfare. Theodore, desperate to save his reputation in his dwindling circle, launched a calculated social media attack. He didn't mention me by name, but alluded to the cruel, ungrateful relative who betrayed the family trust and insinuated that my VP promotion was based on insider trading, not merit. It was a desperate, malicious final swing to destroy my public image. Digital warfare was brutal. The corporate legal team flagged the posts immediately. My professional success was now a public target. Theodore's campaign gained traction in local gossip circles. For a fleeting second, the old, terrified Eloise resurfaced, the girl afraid of being publicly shamed. But the new Eloise took over. I called Alexander, my voice steady. They've crossed the line into defamation, Alexander. It's time to show them the full power of my corporate legal resources. I want to cease and desist, with the threat of a full lawsuit for slander and corporate interference. Defamation demands action. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about self-defense and protecting the life I had built. Theodore had mistaken my independence for weakness, now he would face professionalism. Alexander moved quickly. He compiled a dossier of Theodore's past financial frauds and the lien on the house, proving my family's motivation for slander. The legal machinery was cold, impersonal, and efficient. It was the antithesis of the toxic emotional drama they thrived on. I felt a surge of righteous anger. They had forced my hand, and now they would pay the professional price. Professionalism replaced anger. The cease and desist letter landed like a bomb, complete with a strict deadline for retraction and a list of specific, costly demands. It wasn't my voice, it was the sharp, unyielding voice of a powerful legal team. The difference was critical. I didn't engage personally, my resources did. Alexander made sure the terms were clear: retract all claims immediately, publicly apologize, or face a lawsuit that would not only bankrupt Theodore but also expose the full extent of my parents' complicity. I made the decision: zero tolerance for character assassination. Legal team was unyielding. This time, they called me directly, using the old landline number they knew I would recognize. It was my father, his voice shaky, not with sickness, but with fear. "Eloise, please. He's destroying us. This is the family, your blood." The last-ditch attempt, emotional desperation mixed with total deflection of responsibility. They never once said, "Theodore was wrong," or "We are sorry for the slander." They just begged me to save them from the consequences of their own enabling and poor choices. It was the perfect, final confirmation of their transactional nature. Fear replaced false sickness. I let him finish, hearing the years of manipulation distilled into one desperate plea. I chose my words carefully, delivering them with surgical precision. "Father, my loyalty is to the truth and to myself. Your current situation is a direct, documented consequence of Theodore's actions and your failure to stop him. I will not compromise my professional integrity to rescue the family that never valued it." Click. I hung up. That sound, the click of the receiver, was the sound of the door closing on 3 decades of obligation. It was the final nail in the coffin of my past identity. Door closed on obligation. A few days later, Theodore posted a generic, carefully worded public retraction, no names, no explicit apologies, but enough to satisfy the legal team and halt the defamation suit. The new crisis had evaporated. Not through compromise, but through the overwhelming weight of my boundary enforcement. My parents' lien was executed. Theodore vanished from social media. The ultimate peace was achieved, the cessation of contact, both forced and desired. I had survived the final, most desperate attack. They realized I was no longer their victim, but their judge. Peace was finally achieved. My life wasn't defined by their revenge, but by my response to their final, desperate crisis. I had turned their last attack into the ultimate confirmation of my self-worth. The emptiness of their absence was now filled with the profound satisfaction of self-determination. I was a survivor, a CEO of my own life. And finally, truly free. So, what happens after the smoke clears, the villains are defeated, and the hero gets her freedom? How does she ensure that silence truly means peace, and not just another lull before the next storm? The family was a distant, sealed-off memory. The real world was my thriving company and my relationship with Alexander. But the patterns of toxicity are relentless. A former college friend mentioned seeing my mother at a charity gala, deeply involved in conversation with a newly wealthy distant cousin, Eleanor. The message was clear. My mother hadn't learned a lesson, she had simply found a new resource. She was still hoovering, still seeking her transactional supply. It was a harsh realization of their permanence. Toxicity is relentless. I stared out at the city lights. The cruelest realization was this: my revenge hadn't changed them. It had merely inconvenienced them and redirected their focus. The narcissist doesn't feel guilt or learn accountability. They only feel the frustration of a failed manipulation. They hadn't regretted losing me, they regretted losing my money. Accepting this final, cold truth was the last step of my healing. I wasn't dealing with a dysfunctional family, I was dealing with a permanent, systemic deficiency. Regretted losing my money. I looked at Alexander, talking happily about his day. The knowledge that my mother was pursuing Eleanor didn't cause a ripple of anxiety or anger. I was finally immune. The rage and the desire for retribution had fully faded, replaced by the deep, quiet knowledge that my life was untouchable by their drama. I had traded the emotional chaos of their approval for the profound peace of my self-sovereignty. The revenge was a one-time surgical procedure. The long-term recovery was maintaining the perfect, zero-contact barrier. Self-sovereignty secured. The story of my revenge became the cornerstone of my professional ethos: set boundaries early and enforce them ruthlessly. I learned that the fear of conflict is what keeps you trapped, and true liberation lies in the willingness to say no and accept the inevitable backlash. My family became my greatest, unintended business lesson. They taught me the value of exit strategies and the cost of misplaced loyalty. My success was the boundary, and my peace was the profit. Peace is the final profit. My journey was not just a family revenge story, it was a blueprint for self-rescue. I didn't get the apology I deserved, but I got the freedom I earned. The harsh realization was the final gift: nothing they did or thought could ever touch my happiness again. The power was fully and forever mine. But what about Eleanor, the new victim? Is there ever a way to break the cycle of family exploitation? Or is the only true answer to walk away and never look back? I never expected to hear from Eleanor, the new resource. But narcissists are predictable. A LinkedIn message popped up, innocent at first: "I heard you were close to your mother. I'm facing a strange financial ask from her." Eleanor was unknowingly stepping into the trap I had escaped. For a moment, my old rescuer instinct flared up. But I caught it. My survival depended on not engaging in their drama, even as an advisor. This wasn't my fight, and my peace was non-negotiable. Peace is non-negotiable. I composed a response, carefully deleting and rephrasing until it was perfectly neutral and professional. It was the opposite of the emotional exhaustion they once caused. My message: Dear Eleanor, I haven't been in contact with my mother for years regarding personal or financial matters. I recommend consulting independent legal counsel immediately, not family members. I cannot offer further advice. Short. Final. I offered a clear boundary and a professional solution, refusing to be drawn into the emotional quicksand. This was me standing up for myself by choosing not to fight their battles. Boundary was professional. Alexander saw the message pop up and my reply go out. He didn't ask, he just nodded. That nod was worth 1,000 empty apologies from my parents. It was validation that I had done the right thing, the healthy thing. I realized that my most important act of standing up for myself wasn't the big confrontation, but this quiet, consistent refusal to re-engage. My self-respect was my shield against the lingering manipulation. I no longer needed to prove my worth to anyone, I only needed to maintain my peace. Self-respect is the shield. I cleared out the last drawer of childhood remnants, the physical tokens of a life I no longer owned. This final purge felt like closing the loop completely. There was no more anger, no more bitterness, just a final, clean severance. I wasn't defined by the trauma they inflicted, or even the revenge I executed. I was defined by my capacity to heal and walk away, clean. The final act of standing up for myself was the ability to look back at the wreckage and feel nothing but the cool air of freedom. Final, clean severance. My revenge story ends not with them defeated, but with me victorious in my own life. The greatest lesson is that you must be willing to let go of the idea of who they should be to accept who you are. Standing up for yourself isn't always a shout, sometimes, it's a silent, professional email refusing to participate. But for Eleanor, and for anyone else stuck in that cycle, is professional detachment enough to protect them from a family that truly never gives up? I learned quickly that even in their defeat, my family needed a narrative. Narcissists cannot fail, they can only be betrayed. The final story they spun for our dwindling social circle was simple. I was the cruel, power-hungry daughter who engineered their financial ruin out of spite and jealousy. I was the villain, Theodore the victim, and my parents were the martyrs. This narrative wasn't aimed at me, they knew I was unreachable. It was aimed at shaping public perception and maintaining their illusion of innocence. The blame game was their only legacy. My mother, especially, perfected the art of the martyr. She would dramatically recount how she sacrificed her future for mine, only to be tossed aside. She never mentioned the thousands I funded or the company I saved. Her performance was Oscar-worthy, designed to elicit pity and financial support from others. But hearing the old lies didn't hurt, it was just noise. It was the final, pathetic effort to control a narrative that had already crumbled into dust. Their inability to take responsibility was the root of all their failures. And Theodore? He didn't fade away. He simply reset, convinced that the system, not his ineptitude, had failed him. He launched another startup, another flimsy, underfunded scam, fueled by the same blind self-belief. He truly believed that his sister, the VP, was actively sabotaging him. His blame wasn't a choice, it was a psychological necessity. It was the armor that protected his fragile ego from the truth of his own incompetence. I realized his punishment wasn't financial ruin, it was being eternally trapped by his own delusion. The delusion was his prison. A small online gossip piece surfaced, briefly rehashing the inheritance drama. Alexander offered to have it taken down immediately. I surprised him by saying no. Let it stay, I said. It's irrelevant. The most powerful feeling was realizing that their blame, their lies, and their public narrative had zero emotional weight for me. I was indifferent. Indifference is not the opposite of love, it is the opposite of the toxic emotional investment that kept me tethered. Their power died the moment I stopped caring about their narrative. Eleanor reached out again, confused and hurt. She was looking for validation, for someone to say, yes, your family is exploiting you. I gave her an honest, boundary-driven response. I can't confirm or deny their current activities, but I can confirm that protecting your finances and mental health is your priority. I refused to become her co-conspirator or her source of drama. My final act of self-love was refusing to let their cycle of abuse touch me, even through a secondary victim. Compassion is possible without contact. I understood the true cost of their blame. It cost them any chance of recovery, growth, or true reconciliation. They were so committed to painting me as the villain that they blinded themselves to the lessons they could have learned. They chose to remain victims rather than becoming accountable adults. That was the most devastating price they paid. As I booked a flight to the Amalfi Coast with Alexander, I realized my freedom was guaranteed not by their ruin, but by their predictable refusal to change. Their stagnation was my ultimate confirmation. My new life was defined by the relationships built on mutual respect. Alexander, my colleagues, my chosen friends, they were the family I earned. They celebrated my success without expectation and supported me without judgment. The story wasn't Theodore's revenge anymore, it was Eloise's liberation. I finally found the peace I always craved, realizing it couldn't be gifted by my parents. It had to be taken by me. I had won the war not against them, but against the part of me that still craved their love. My family will continue to blame me for their choices, that's their cross to bear. My advice to you, the audience, is simple: don't wait for the blame, embrace your freedom. The revenge is the moment you choose peace over the toxic chaos. But what about the legal fallout? Could my parents or Theodore ever try one last, desperate attempt to reclaim the inheritance through a surprise legal challenge years later? The biggest difference between my old life and my new one was the presence of Alexander. He never judged the necessity of the revenge, he simply supported the woman who executed it. One evening, after I'd shared the latest ridiculous rumor from my mother, he didn't offer advice. He just said, "You chose peace, Eloise." That's the hardest choice anyone can make when they're fighting a toxic past. You are not defined by their blame, you are defined by your integrity. His validation was my ultimate safe harbor. Integrity is the definition. I built a new family from the ground up, colleagues who became friends, and friends who proved their loyalty. They understood that the silence surrounding my past wasn't shame. It was protection. They didn't demand the full drama, they only offered acceptance. One friend, who knew parts of the truth, told me, "Your worth isn't in your willingness to suffer for them, but in your refusal to do so." That was the final lesson on self-value. Real family doesn't hold your trauma hostage, they hold your hand. Acceptance is true family. In the professional world, I noticed something remarkable: the scandal faded. My colleagues, aware of the quiet legal cleanup, moved on. They didn't see a disgraced daughter, they saw a decisive, highly competent VP. Their silence wasn't ignorance, it was respect for my boundaries. The silence was the ultimate validation that my professional identity was stronger than my family's toxic narrative. The only people still talking about the blame game were my parents. My success became the loudest rebuttal to their lies. Success is the rebuttal. I found myself, years later, actually feeling a strange sense of gratitude for the hardship. If they hadn't been so toxic, I wouldn't have built the emotional and financial walls I now depended on. The pain had forced me to evolve into a stronger, more self-reliant woman. I wasn't grateful to them, but grateful for the lessons the situation provided. The revenge wasn't the goal, the strength gained in executing it was the reward. I realized that true closure means accepting the past without letting it dictate your future. Strength is the reward. The supportive voices around me helped me realize that the blame from my toxic family was their problem, not mine. I found my true value not in their approval, but in the love and respect of my chosen family. My life today is proof that you can choose your peace over their chaos. This is the end of the narrative, but the legal reality still poses a threat. What were the specific legal safeguards Alexander put in place to ensure that my parents and Theodore could never touch my life, or my money, again? The greatest revenge was realizing I wasn't just the VP they underestimated, I was the CEO of my own life. My career soared. I leveraged the confidence gained from dismantling my family's power structure into strategic, aggressive professional moves. The financial stability I now commanded was a fortress against their future attempts. I bought a new home, not one tainted by old memories, but one built on my merit. Every promotion, every successful deal, was a quiet, powerful affirmation of my worth outside their toxic system. My new home was my fortress. My family defined luxury as inherited wealth and superficial status. I redefined it. Luxury, to me, was the freedom to give without expectation. The joy of building something that mattered. I started funding small community mentorship programs for young women. Using my hard-earned money to empower others was the antidote to the financial toxicity of my past. It created a legacy built on contribution, not control. My wealth wasn't a weapon against family, it was a tool for social change. The greatest feeling was signing those checks, knowing my money was finally doing good. My relationship with Alexander flourished because it was built on transparency, the exact opposite of my childhood. We didn't rely on financial dependency or emotional blackmail, we relied on respect and communication. He was my partner, not my puppet or my rescuer. The trust we shared felt more valuable than any inheritance. It was the first time I felt truly seen and loved for the woman I actually was, not the role I was forced to play. We established our own traditions, our own holidays, a life entirely separate from the expectations of the Hoopers. Our love was the purest form of my liberation. True healing wasn't the disappearance of the memories, it was the absence of the constant, underlying anxiety. I used to wake up every day with a knot in my stomach, waiting for the next crisis they would create. Now, I woke up to quiet peace. The silence of their non-presence was profound. I was no longer bracing for impact, I was planning for expansion. My mind, freed from the emotional labor of managing their dysfunction, was now sharp and focused on innovation. The biggest win wasn't the money, it was the reclamation of my mental health and my peace of mind. My peace was my greatest asset. I spent years trying to fulfill the legacy they demanded: conformity, performance, and financial rescue. Now, I was building my own. My legacy would be integrity, accountability, and compassionate strength. I designed a future where manipulation was impossible and boundaries were sacred. This wasn't just building a new life, it was rewriting my DNA. I created a life I was proud to inherit, a life built on merit and self-respect, not obligation or guilt. I had turned a painful end into a magnificent new beginning. Rewriting my DNA was key. Looking back, I realized the revenge was necessary, but the real victory was the shift in perspective. I used to define my value by how little I displeased them. Now, I define it by how much I please myself. The toxic family drama will always exist. But my role in it has ended. I closed the book, locked the door, and walked into a life bathed in sun and self-determination. The silence from them is not a threat, it's a promise. My commitment to zero contact is the maintenance of my empire. I found my freedom not just in financial independence, but in the mental space to imagine a future without fear. My story proves that you can rewrite your script, no matter how toxic the original writers were. You can build a magnificent life on the ruins of their expectations. But before we close the final chapter, let's address the practical. What is the most unbreakable legal structure for protecting future assets, like my new home and company, from any last-ditch creative legal challenge the Hoopers might attempt? I thought the silence was complete, but the collateral damage from the family drama still sought to pull me back in. The first one to try was Aunt Carol, the self-appointed family mediator. She called with a syrupy voice, "Eloise, you need to talk to your mother. She's heartbroken. You know, family is everything." This was the mediator trap, forcing me to take responsibility for their feelings. I knew her goal wasn't reconciliation, it was to earn favor with my parents and gain access to my professional network. I refused to be the bridge they demanded. I used the same technique that worked on Theodore, cold, professional distance. "Carol," I said, my voice calm, "I appreciate your concern. But my relationship with my immediate family is permanently closed. Any discussion about their personal or financial well-being is private, and I will not participate in mediating or receiving updates. I wish you well." No emotion, no defense, no negotiation. I didn't justify my decision, I merely stated my policy. This was the final stage of standing up for myself, realizing I didn't owe anyone an explanation for my peace. The boundary held firm. The next challenge came from people who weren't mediators, but simply information seekers, old friends looking for the juicy details of the Hooper downfall. They'd approach me at professional events, feigning sympathy. "It's awful what Theodore did to your mother." LOEs. They wanted me to confirm their bias and feed the gossip mill. I used a deflection strategy. I immediately switched the conversation to their career or a neutral business topic. I treated the family drama like a contagious disease. I refused to host it or spread it. Their curiosity withered against my composure. I had to accept a painful truth. For many of the old ties, I would forever be the cold, ungrateful daughter. They would cling to the simple narrative of good parents betrayed by a ruthless child. I stopped fighting it. My integrity was for me, not for public consumption. Their judgment was based on their own fear of setting boundaries. I made peace with being the villain in their unfinished story because it meant I was the hero in my own. The freedom in accepting the blame was absolute. I stopped seeking their approval entirely. Eventually, the calls stopped. The messages faded. The old ties cooled into absolute zero. The people who demanded I be a family member or be the bigger person finally realized my decision was final. I proved that consistent boundaries are stronger than emotional blackmail. The quiet that settled over my life wasn't the silence of death, it was the quiet of a field after a devastating storm, clean, fresh, and ready for new growth. I had successfully excised the toxicity without compromising my peace. The quiet was the final reward. I now use my story as a lesson. I tell young colleagues, your no is one of the most powerful words in your vocabulary. My entire liberation was built on two simple, yet terrifying, words, no more. I learned that the people who respect your no are the only people worth having in your life. The people who fight your boundaries are the people who benefited from you having none. I chose my peace over their comfort, and that choice remains the cornerstone of my power. My no was the foundation of my empire. My former life and all its old ties have cooled into a frozen, distant chapter. The family drama is over, the blame is irrelevant, and the boundaries are unbreakable. I am truly free. The peace I built is now self-sustaining. But for those of you facing a similar choice, knowing the right thing to do is one thing, but knowing how to legally safeguard it is another. What specific trust or legal entity is the ultimate, unbreakable firewall to protect the assets of a survivor from relentless, final legal attacks? The biggest turning point wasn't a financial milestone or a professional triumph, it was the moment Alexander asked me to be his wife. There was no inherited diamond, no society spectacle. It was a quiet, private moment that felt more real than all the Hoopers' staged performances combined. His simple, honest question validated every sacrifice I had made for my freedom. He didn't ask me to escape my past, he asked me to build a future. That yes was the final, definitive step out of the shadow of their name. Building a future was the focus. Our wedding was the ultimate rejection of the Hooper legacy. It wasn't a transactional display of wealth, it was a celebration of two souls choosing each other. No family members were invited, and their absence was the greatest gift. The air was clean, filled with genuine love and respect from my chosen family. I finally understood that family isn't blood, it's the people who show up and stay, without demanding a cut. Standing there, marrying Alexander, I realized I hadn't just healed from the trauma, I had successfully inoculated myself against future toxicity. I chose joy, not duty. As we planned our life, a deep, persistent fear arose, the fear of inheriting their dysfunction. I worried that I would subconsciously replicate the abuse. Alexander, with his endless patience, held my hand. We break the cycle, he promised. We start new traditions. Their story ends with them. My focus shifted from avenging the past to protecting the future. My greatest responsibility wasn't my career, it was ensuring that any child we had would never know the transactional nature of the Hooper name. My greatest revenge was ensuring their line of emotional abuse ended with me. Alexander, true to his word, built the ultimate legal firewall. We established an irrevocable trust, completely separating my personal and professional assets from any possible future claims. It was complex, ironclad, and necessary. It was the financial equivalent of no contact. This trust wasn't about tax breaks, it was about psychological protection. Knowing that even if they hired the most aggressive lawyers, they could never touch our new life, offered a profound sense of security. The legal structure was the final, impenetrable boundary. The trust was the ultimate firewall. The ultimate proof of my successful liberation was the silence. The drama had run out of fuel because I was no longer providing the audience or the money. Theodore was still trying to launch his fourth big idea with minimal success. My parents were reduced to minor society footnotes. Their noise finally died down, replaced by the symphony of my own thriving life. I realized the cycle of abuse isn't broken by revenge, but by detachment and the building of a self-determined future. My turning point was choosing growth over grievance. My story is proof that the end of one life can be the magnificent beginning of another. You can survive the most toxic family dynamic and create pure, authentic joy. The power to rewrite your script is always yours. I secured my freedom, my fortune, and my future with Alexander. But for all of you who are now considering your own path to freedom, what are the 5 absolute non-negotiable legal and psychological boundaries that must be put in place immediately to ensure your toxic family never gets a second chance? People ask if I regret the revenge. The financial strategy, the legal maneuvers, was it worth the emotional toll? I tell them that true revenge isn't the destruction of your enemies, it's the meticulous, beautiful rebuilding of yourself. My parents lost their money, I lost my trauma. The inheritance I truly gained wasn't monetary, it was the clarity and self-respect that allows me to live a life built on authenticity. My success isn't about their failure, it's about my liberation. I wouldn't trade the peace I have now for anything. Peace over destruction. Your survival is your success story. Your healing is your ultimate victory. If you are fighting a toxic family, remember this, the final battle is always fought within yourself. The moment you decide your peace matters more than their approval. But the technical side of this story, the legal strategy that made the revenge and the freedom irreversible, is what truly protected me. We've covered the why and the what, but to truly secure your future, you need the how. What are the 3 most critical, expert-level legal steps required to make a clean break from a wealthy, toxic family absolutely permanent? People ask if I regret the revenge. The financial strategy, the legal maneuvers, was it worth the emotional toll? I tell them that true revenge isn't the destruction of your enemies, it's the meticulous, beautiful rebuilding of yourself. My parents lost their money, I lost my trauma. The inheritance I truly gained wasn't monetary, it was the clarity and self-respect that allows me to live a life built on authenticity. My success isn't about their failure, it's about my liberation. I wouldn't trade the peace I have now for anything. Peace over destruction. Your survival is your success story. Your healing is your ultimate victory. If you are fighting a toxic family, remember this, the final battle is always fought within yourself. The moment you decide your peace matters more than their approval. But the technical side of this story, the legal strategy that made the revenge and the freedom irreversible, is what truly protected me. We've covered the why and the what, but to truly secure your future, you need the how. What are the 3 most critical, expert-level legal steps required to make a clean break from a wealthy, toxic family absolutely permanent? People ask if I regret the revenge. The financial strategy, the legal maneuvers, was it worth the emotional toll? I tell them that true revenge isn't the destruction of your enemies, it's the meticulous, beautiful rebuilding of yourself. My parents lost their money, I lost my trauma. The inheritance I truly gained wasn't monetary, it was the clarity and self-respect that allows me to live a life built on authenticity. My success isn't about their failure, it's about my liberation. I wouldn't trade the peace I have now for anything. Peace over destruction. Your survival is your success story. Your healing is your ultimate victory. If you are fighting a toxic family, remember this, the final battle is always fought within yourself. The moment you decide your peace matters more than their approval. But the technical side of this story, the legal strategy that made the revenge and the freedom irreversible, is what truly protected me. We've covered the why and the what, but to truly secure your future, you need the how. What are the 3 most critical, expert-level legal steps required to make a clean break from a wealthy, toxic family absolutely permanent?